Have you ever found yourself staring at a closet full of clothes that you never wear, or a kitchen overflowing with gadgets you never use, yet feeling unable to part with any of it? You're not alone. Many of us struggle with letting go of clutter, and the reasons go far beyond sentimentality or a lack of organization skills. It's actually deeply rooted in the psychology of decision making and the way our brains are wired. So, today we're going to talk about why your brain might be having trouble letting go of the clutter. In the late 1970s, Daniel Kahneman, who, by the way, has won a Nobel Prize for this work, and Amos Tversky revolutionized our understanding of how we perceive gains and losses. The work was called the prospect theory, and this theory sheds light on why we often make seemingly irrational decisions like holding on to items that we don't need. Their insights into human behavior have profound implications for everything from economics and marketing to personal habits, and yes, even the clutter in our homes. The prospect theory is about how we make decisions, especially when we're faced with uncertainty or risk. Instead of being perfectly rational, surprise, we often make decisions based on perceived gains or losses rather than actual outcomes. It really all comes down to maintaining the status quo. We don't want to lose anything that we already have. We like things the way they are for the most part, and we interpret gains and losses according to this status quo. This is our point of reference. We tend to be more risk averse about gains relative to the status quo, like, "Meh, I'm not going to risk it. Things are fine the way they are. I don't need more." But risk seeking about losses relative to the status quo. I'll do whatever it takes to keep things the way they are and not lose anything. Now, there are two parts to this, two functions that are used in the prospect theory that show where our decision making deviates from reality. One is the probability weighing function. This is how we weigh the probability of something happening or whether or not we see this as something that's likely to occur. So you have a y-axis, and this represents the subjective probability. This is how you think something is. The x-axis represents the actual probability, how likely something actually is. So a diagonal line at 45 degrees right up the center would represent perfectly accurate perception. This would mean that our assessment is spot on. Well, the rule of numbers shows that we value things like this. The curve is above the diagonal line for low probability. Like if this is really unlikely to happen, but we think that it's more likely to happen. We overweigh small probabilities. We think that rare events are more likely than they actually are. You may hesitate to get rid of those extra pots because you fear that one day you'll need exactly that pot to make a specific meal, even though this is a rare event. In reality, you rarely use these extra pots, and the likelihood that you'll need them all at once is pretty low. But the curve is below the diagonal line for high probabilities. We underweigh large possibilities. We think that common events are less likely than they actually are. You may underestimate the daily frustration and inconvenience of having a cluttered kitchen, even though the probability of it causing stress and inefficiency inside of your daily cooking routine is actually pretty high. This reminds me of people who are afraid to fly, but they're not afraid to drive in a car. Even though the likelihood of something happening in a car crash, or like the likelihood of a fatality from a car crash, is much higher than the likelihood of fatality from being in an airplane. So that's where we land on the probability weighing function. The other is the value function. This is how we view the value and benefit of something. For this graph, the y-axis represents the subjective value or the perceived benefit. So this is how valuable you think something is. And the x-axis, or the horizontal line, represents actual gains and losses, how valuable something really is in monetary value or in numerical value. The origin is the center point here, where the x meets the y-axis. This is our reference point, and for most people, this is the status quo. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said that we judge things based on a reference of whatever our status quo is, whatever is normal for us. Now, the rule of numbers and statistics says that our chart looks something like this. This top right section over here is all about the gains. Everything to the right means that the value, the actual value, is higher, and everything from the middle up means that our subjective value, what we think the value is higher, and this is where we tend to fall statistically. The curve above the x-axis here on the right side bends downward, and this means that the more you gain, the less additional value you feel. So for example, gaining $100 feels great, but gaining another 100 after that doesn't feel quite as good as the first 100. It's starting to taper off the further we go on the value scale here. Now, the lower section is losses. Everything that's below the horizontal line, that's how we feel something is valued, or how much we feel something would have been lost. And everything to the left of the vertical line is what the loss would actually be. Now, our statistical value is convex for losses. That means that the curve below bends upwards. This means that, similar to the gains, the more you lose, the less additional pain you feel. Losing $100 feels pretty bad. Losing another 100 after that doesn't feel quite as bad as losing the first 100. But what's interesting is that the slope for losses is much steeper than the slope for gains. The losses hurt more. For example, losing $100 feels much worse. It's way further down here on the pain scale than gaining $100 feels good. Or, in decluttering terms, decluttering a nice pair of shoes, even if they don't fit anymore, feels worse than getting a new pair of shoes for your birthday feels good. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is called loss aversion. And that's really what we're here to talk about. This is why your brain won't let go of clutter. Don't worry, we're also going to talk about some ways that you can work around this too at the end of the video, particularly when it comes to letting go of your stuff. So stick around. But in a nutshell, we tend to overvalue small gains, undervalue large gains, feel losses more sharply than equivalent gains, and misjudge the likelihood of events happening. So that's where we are. I'm going to let you soak that in for a minute, because I want to take a moment to thank the ones who are responsible for helping me to keep calm and focused while I planned all of this content for you, and that is Aura Health. If you want to get out of your own head or dig deep into your own head and understand your mind even better, then this is the app that I recommend. I've personally struggled with stress and anxiety for years, and to be honest, sometimes I just feel a little bit down, and finding effective ways to manage those feelings and jump into a pronto perspective shift is what Aura Health offers, and it's been a life-changing product for me. Aura is a newer mindfulness and sleep app that won the Best of Apple Award and is used by over 8 million people already, and it's an all-in-one app. It offers thousands of meditations, stories, CBT, life coaching, breathwork. Their content is created by hundreds of expert coaches and therapists from around the world. Aura's AI personalization ensures that you're getting the most relevant and effective content for your needs. So you don't have to go through scouring and doing random searches every time. It's going to learn what you like and give you more of that. The first 500 people who use my code or the link in my description will get a free trial and an exclusive 25% off. Now let's dive back into how we can apply these principles of prospect theory and loss aversion to our lives, specifically in the context of decluttering. Now, loss aversion is a cognitive bias that refers to this tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. I was actually just talking to Matt about this the other day. He brought up how exciting it would be if somebody gifted you a vacation. Wouldn't that be amazing? A free vacation, including flights and food, so you're not out any money, all for your enjoyment. Compare that to someone giving you cash to go book your own vacation. Now it somehow feels less good. It's still nice, but you have to go through the process of owning a bunch of cash and then letting it all go toward the vacation. Part of you might even start to wonder, well, do I need to spend all of this on the vacation? Maybe I can keep a little bit of it for savings or to pay my bills, and all of this suddenly becomes extra stress. That's one reason why gift cards are generally more popular than just giving cash. People will often not use the cash to splurge on themselves because of the sensation of loss. Think about it this way. What would you do to keep from losing your home? People have done some pretty aggressive things to hold on to what they have. Would you beg? Would you forge a document just once, just one tiny little signature to keep from losing everything? Maybe, maybe not. You might entertain the thought, but what about upgrading to a house that's twice the value of yours? Would you beg for that? Nah, we're fine the way we are, right? Would you entertain the thought of forging a document? Probably not. It's not worth the risk of prison. Now, I'm not saying that you would do either of these things, but I'm just saying that you can feel the emotional difference between the two decisions. Loss aversion can significantly impact our decision-making process regarding our belongings, making it difficult to let go of things that we don't even use anymore or need. We fear that perceived loss associated with getting rid of something, even if it holds little to no practical value or serves no purpose in our lives. Brain imaging studies have shown that the emotional response to losses is processed in the same areas of the brain associated with pain. It can literally be painful letting go of things. Now, the prospect theory laid the foundation for understanding the endowment effect, which is something that I've talked about many times. It's very closely related to loss aversion, and I've mentioned it here on the channel. And I also talk about it a lot in my course, Clutter Cure, because it's literally a psychological bias for the things that we own, where we attribute more value to something simply because we own it. For example, in one study, subjects were randomly assigned to be buyers or sellers. The sellers were given a coffee mug that was valued at $6 and were asked whether they would be willing to sell their mugs at a range of prices between 25 cents and $9.25. And buyers were not given mugs, but they were asked whether they would be willing to buy a mug from the sellers at the same range of prices, 25 cents to $9.25. The results were that the sellers consistently valued the mugs higher, $7.12 on average, than the value that the buyers would spend, which was $2.87 on average. So there are so many factors at play. You're not necessarily making your own decisions all the time. Sometimes there are things that are just wired into us, and we have to learn how to overcome those, work with them, and work around them. And 3 ways that you can do that are to, 1, reframe. There's something called a framing effect, which means that how choices are presented or framed can affect our decisions. So a scenario framed in terms of potential losses can lead to different choices compared to the same scenario that's framed in terms of potential gains, as we just learned. When you're thinking about decluttering your stuff, if you're focused only on the stuff that you're letting go of and the fact that you're losing things, try to reframe that to present choices in a way that emphasizes the gains rather than the losses. This can help mitigate the effects of that loss aversion. Also, realizing the downside of holding on to these things, like an abundance of clutter, stress, or an overall sense of overwhelm, can help you to reframe your perception of what constitutes a loss. Number 2, you can start with some small wins. Remember that the pain that you feel letting go of the first thing is going to be less with each additional thing that you let go of. Remember, that's one of the things with the value function that it showed. Losing your first $100 is way worse than losing your subsequent $200, $300, etc. Use that to your advantage when you're looking at discarding your things. Even if the first one stings, try it again. That second and that third and that fourth are bound to be less painful. And finally, and the whole purpose of this video, is to practice awareness, and that all starts with education. So understanding the concepts of these things that I talked about today and how it influences your decision making will hopefully make you more aware next time. And you can keep trying to remind yourself when it starts feeling painful or tricky going through things of all of the stuff that you learned here. And is there a way that you can reframe the way that your brain naturally wants to think of these things as you're going through making space in your home? See if you can force yourself into more rational decision making just through a practice of education and repetition and awareness. Hopefully you found this video helpful, or at very least interesting. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give this video a thumbs up so I'll know that you enjoy this content. And if you had any light bulb moments or have any thoughts or conversations related to the video, as always, be sure to leave those down in the comments. Thank you to Aura Health for sponsoring this video and helping to get this information out to the people who need it the most. And if you need help with the more tangible aspects of going through your stuff, then I recommend my free resource library. You can access that at miadanielle.com/freebies or see the link down in the description. And I also have a free workshop where I share my clutter-free formula. You'll see the link to that down in the description as well. Have a great day, and I'll chat with you next week.